We're back here on the program Jones and Company today and speaking with the Member of Parliament for Montague, Mr. Richard Lightbourne. And what is the most important issue you think in the minds of your constituents today, Mr. Lightbourne, the people you represent?
I would say the two main issues, and it's hard to differentiate one from the other, would be a question of crime and a question of work, of unemployment. There's massive unemployment in the Montague constituency, as I'm sure there is in every constituency in the country. You know, you've got 30-whatever thousand people who are out of work, and really little hope of work. All that we see on a regular basis is businesses downsizing, and that's a real concern. Mm-hmm. But and as I say, at the same time, it's a question of crime. Crime's not only something which affects your constituency, but again, the whole country. Until we get crime under control, it's going to continue to be a very negative effect to the country. We have to address it, and the schemes that government has introduced since they came in 2012 obviously have not working, and I don't really see anything that they're proposing in the future that really is seeking to address these issues.
Mm-hmm. While the response to crime is certainly the government's responsibility, successive governments have battled with crime for many years, for decades. And we've seen an escalation of crime, say, from the 80s with the drug trade straight to the present time. And one wonders whether or not government is capacitated or has the capacity to really reduce the level of crime, or whether or not it is a community responsibility in dealing with the issue of crime. You have policemen on our streets. You've empowered policemen. The F&M government did. This particular government has, in terms of giving them equipment and all the rest of it. What else can the government do?
Well, to start with, I think the the government put their foot in their mouth when they made crime a political issue, and so now when they found out that they were not addressing crime, suddenly they turned around and decided it's a community problem and not a political one. So I think they really started the debate in that regard, and notwithstanding that, I think if one wants to be open about it, it is certainly a community problem. And if you go back, as you say, to the 70s and the 80s, when the drug trade started taking over the country, the failure of the government of the day to deal with it and address it is a major cause, in my view, of the origin of our problems in this country.
But aren't you dealing with a Caribbean-wide phenomenon? If you watch television, say in South Florida, you would see the same phenomenon, the escalation of serious crimes, crimes against the person. If you listen to what is coming from the Southern Caribbean, Jamaica, Trinidad, and places such, you would see the same thing happening. And one wonders whether or not government itself, standing alone, has the wherewithal to really attack the problem.
Well, I think that the drug trafficking was the real beginning of the breakdown of family life as we knew it. And when we continue to have so many children born to children in this country, And it's hard to say they're unwanted, but they're certainly unexpected. And when the parent, the mother, is really unable to deal with the child, in many cases, and they don't have employment, and in very many cases, they don't have any support from the father of the child. What can one expect? You've got young girls come to the office at the headquarters on Village Road regularly. Young girl, 25, and she's got 4 and 5 children, and they're by different fathers. Very occasionally, do any of the fathers take a real interest or in any way get involved in the upbringing of their child, much less providing any financial support? We've got a real problem, and there's so many things that contribute, but we just seem to sit back and really start. We forget to address anything. We're not going to solve crime by giving the police more cars and more weapons and additional police. That is dealing with the problem once it's arisen. You got to start addressing the issue to prevent the person getting to that point, so that I'm going to grow up and I'm not going to think that it's all right to put a gun in my hand and go and rob somebody.
But that is where the moralizing institutions of the society failed in terms of imparting the type value system that ought to be imparted to the young or the youth of the nation. And the point is that there are dysfunctional families responsible for antisocial behavioral problems in the society. The question is, what can government do about that? When you have families that are failing, when you have the moralizing institutions of the country failing, how can the government address that?
Well, government can't legislate morals, that's for sure.
Right.
But and I think too often we're so willing to pass the blame to somebody else and suggest, oh, it's the church not doing its share of responsibility, or the schools, or whatever, and not accepting that it's you, the family member, who's not doing your job in bringing up your child in a way that the child is going to be a good citizen. The money seems to have become such an important factor in life here that you're prepared to overlook the fact that your child is not working, unemployed, and yet you're quite happy to accept the gifts and so on that he brings home that you know he couldn't afford. Right. So where'd he get it from? It had to be invariably some criminal activity. You get a child that comes home and brings something home that he's obviously taken from somewhere. Now, in my youth, which isn't as long ago as you might feel, you know, your parent would come to you and say, where'd you get that from?
Exactly.
That's not yours.
Exactly.
And they would take you back to where you got it from, and you would hope that the person that they took it back would give your child a bit of a lecture, accept what they had done was wrong, and scare the you-know-what out of them, and so that at the end of the day they wouldn't do it again. And I think so many children over the years, they have that. You hear about these people telling you that, their mother, the father used to beat them a little bit. Well, I'm not suggesting beating, but there's a certain amount of it's discipline. It's simply discipline. Mm-hmm. Not allowing children to get away with anything simply because you're scared they're going to talk back to you or whatever. You know, we have to, and if you start at an early age, children are going to grow into the position where they do know right from wrong.
Mr. Lightbourne, I hear politicians talk about crime all the time and the need for us to do something. Let's imagine the F&M wins the election, whenever it's called. Richard Lightbourne is the Minister of National Security. We have a crime problem.
Wouldn't take it.
You wouldn't take it?
No, right. I'm only kidding.
Right.
I'm only
we have a crime problem.
Yeah.
And you are responsible for our national security. What do you do? What do you do?
Well, it's to say, to start with, as I suggested earlier, this isn't a this isn't a one-dimensional issue. We don't solve it by having more police cars and issuing new weapons and giving the police new recruits. That of itself isn't going to solve it. There are all of these different facets in our country which need to be addressed. So starting a Minister of National Security wouldn't be addressing the issue alone. He'd be addressing this with other ministers in terms of your schooling. That has to be a major component in the whole idea. In terms of employment, of providing proper employment for your citizens. All of these things contribute to the crime issue. And government is at fault in giving you the idea that they're going to solve a problem overnight. And the false expectation. When they came in telling us they had the answer for crime, everyone expected and looked around and expected them to show us the plan that they had. Surely they had a plan. Unfortunately, the country didn't sit down and ask them what it was, how they're going to address it. You talk about your urban renewal as if that's some panacea to the crime issue. Every time you talk about it in Parliament, they'd start talking about, this wonderful urban renewal, and that's going to solve the problem. It obviously has not. And so if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But in this case, it is broke and it needs to be fixed. There has to be a change in how you address these problems. There's questions of every once in a while. Government has consultants to determine whether everything. You have a consultant for every problem they have. Well, you wouldn't think that crime is a problem. Crime is in many respects, the most important thing that we need to address in this country. I personally would engage persons outside of the country to get involved and come and help us. I'm not suggesting by any means that our police force here are not a wonderful force. They don't have very capable people. But obviously, something needs to be done. Something needs to be changed. And I feel that having advice from outside countries would not hurt us in the least. Another problem is you have so many of our police force, we've all got family. It's a small country. The person you go to arrest, that's my brother's girlfriend. They're all related in some way. Yeah. And until we get to the point where I know they have a little ad on TV now about the woman claiming that she's happy she sent her uncle to jail or something because she reported him. Well, that's what we've got to get toward.
So it's the entire community coming together.
Everybody's got to get involved. Yeah.
J. Edgar Hoover says that law enforcement cannot fix a crime problem that the family is created. That law enforcement can only deal with enforcing the law, but when you have families who are not bringing up children and young people to obey laws, law enforcement can only enforce laws, right?
No, well, that certainly true. I would agree with that very much. Yeah. I mean, you get the other thing is every year we talk about 5,000 children coming out of school. Now, we can't provide jobs for the people that are already here. So where are these additional 5,000 jobs going to come from? Now, I mean, one thing you need to do is start addressing the point where babies are not having babies. There's got to be a responsibility for bringing up a child. So it's part of your education, I guess, that you encourage the women to ensure that
So, but how is the government going to fix the level of, say, promiscuity in the society? You know, I've just spoken with some Jamaican politicians. The former Prime Minister, Mr. Bruce Golding. I spoke recently with the leader of the opposition in Jamaica. Made a special trip to Jamaica and interviewed them. They have the very same problems that we have. The narrative is exactly the same. They talk about the economy, all right? And they will tell you in Jamaica that Bahamas has the best economy in the region, but yet we have a high incidence of crime. So the question is, what do you do? We have changed from the Free National Movement to the Progressive Liberal Party to run the affairs of the country. The major issues back in 2012 were the very same that we have today: crime, the economy. The question is, can you and your colleagues in the Free National Movement do any better on the economy, for instance?
Well, let's finish off this where we started. Promiscuity is one thing.
Yes.
That's one thing. Can't stop people.
How can you stop that?
You can't stop them having sex.
Right.
But you can at least get them to the point where they're going to, as doctors will tell you, they're shots they can give you, or is it a...
But young women need to want to have contraceptives. If they don't want contraceptives, it has to do with education, right?
You give an injection these days, and that's a 5-year protection. You can't have a child for 5 years.
But you want to sterilize,
Bahamian
women?
Well, when you have the mothers, and I know a number of them in my constituency. You got a 13-year-old girl who starts being promiscuous. Do you think it makes any sense her simply allowing her to take the risk of having a child when she's not equipped in any possible way to bring up a child, to look after a child?
Yeah, but Mr. Lightbourne, what do you do? Do you hold it down and say, listen, you must take this shot?
No.
What do you do? How do you get people to use contraceptives?
Well, I think the mothers and the mothers have to be very much a part of the process. They have to appreciate that something needs to be done to prevent the birth of a child that the family is not equipped to deal with, to look after. The other thing is, we continue to allow the fathers of these children to go away scot-free. If you knew the difficulty in a mother enforcing an order for periodic payments against the father, it's a nightmare, total nightmare. The courts are filled up with women applying for an order that the father makes certain payments to the child, to the maintenance of the child. Then they have to go, so they get an order. Well, that usually takes them, I don't know how many months. You go to court, you go turning up there every couple of weeks to see whether payment's been made. No payment's been made. So what do? Then the whole process continues. Then they have to get a date for the person to come before the court again. And then meanwhile, the man's gone and had children elsewhere. And you know, the whole process just goes on endlessly. Countries have jurisdiction, which I feel that we need to adopt, which makes the father responsible for his child.
There are many young men who would wish to be responsible, but they will tell you, Mr. Lightbourne, well, you know, the politicians have not created the environment for me to get a job. I am unemployed. I really want to take care of my child, they say, but I do not have a job. Well, so Jones, what do you do?
Mr. Jones, that's the exception, okay? Most are running from it. They're not they're not blaming the government on not giving them a job so they can't look after their child. They don't want to pay for a child which they feel is now living, the child is with the mother who may now be with some other man, and their perception is that that man now is going to benefit from the payment that I make for this child. So they do not want to be supporting some other man.
Yeah, but the point
That's
is...
that's how they view it. Many view it.
The point is, what can politicians do about that?
Well,
because the laws are on the books,
well, the
and people have been committed to prison for not taking care of their children. So the laws are clear. So what can a government do?
A government can introduce law which makes it mandatory. And this is not unusual. Certainly, I don't know about the Caribbean countries, but certainly in Europe, if you have a child with a woman, not your spouse, then you will have an order made. A percentage of your salary is deducted every week from your salary. No, there's no question of it. And you have two, it's the same thing. So then when the father understands that at the end of the month he can get very little money because of these obligations to his legal obligations to these children, which are enforceable, then he might have a different view about indiscriminately having children that he does not wish to accept responsibility for.
Okay. We have to take a look at some other issues because time slips by so quickly. We take this final break and we'll come right back.